the societal aspect of it. And I know you talk
No,
about ACE.
I'm glad you're bringing it up because I want to share something that I learned a long time ago. It was like in '89, I think. I was on my bachelor's and I had one of the best professors ever in psychology. And he was an expert witness. And he handed something to us which I still use. And that's a while back. And he put our emotions and how our neurotransmitters work. So if you put things on like a spectrum, on a line, and for example, you put depression on one side and you put mania or aggression on the other side, depending on where we are, that's how we're going to feel and that's how we're going to act out. Let's take a look at depression. The guy was phenomenal, by the way. I think I remember the name, but that's not important.
Let's keep his anonymity. It's just between
Yeah,
me and you,
yeah,
Carola.
exactly. When you go out on the depression scale, you go through a window of suicidality. When people go further out, they will be so depressed they have absolutely no energy to do anything. When we heal, we're coming back through that window. And that's the time when we really want to pay attention and make sure people are safe. And then when they come out of that, they'll be better. A lot of things will kick in. They're more functional. And there's a purpose, and we have a moral compass and all sorts of things. When you go out on the aggression, or call it mania, or call it whatever, the higher level of energy, this is a low level of energy, that's a high level of energy. It can get so high that, yeah, we can actually say, I'm just going to get rid of you. And it doesn't matter to me. But that's, again, a window over here.
Right.
So when you go through the window. When you come back through the same window. And I have to tell you, I love to learn these things because they're so practical to me. Like, okay, where am I right now?
So during your that's a great question where you said, where am I at right now? So during your, now, was it all professional, or did you actually go to like self-help programs or anything to that, especially when you were dealing with your own addictions, because you had your own addiction
I
issues?
just have
Do you mind
nicotine.
if I, oh, nicotine. Oh, that's a good one too.
It has receptor sites. Guess when I started? I was
I don't know, when you were 17?
7 years old.
Oh, 7 years old. Oh, wow. That's really
That was
young.
the only thing I could do. There was nothing else. It was so miserable. And
Well, I think it was Ozzy Osbourne. He said that quitting smoking was, or quitting heroin was easier than quitting smoking.
I believe it.
Uh, so because that was one of my addictions that I struggled with as well, was the nicotine habit. And that
So
started for me so that I could be accepted.
it
It was
has
an
a social
interesting,
aspect later down the
right.
road. It's also
Yeah.
connected to chemical dependency. Drinking and smoking and doing these activities goes together. And I would think that I was probably smoking when I was older, also to be accepted in high school. But at
Right.
7,
But how did you start at 7? It was just
it
like,
was
talk to me
simple
about that.
misery. It was simple misery. I mean, it was horrific abuse at all times, no protection, no safety. And these crazy people that were, one was my biological parent and the other one was not, when they were out of the house, the only thing I could find, and this is so sad, but it's like, Camel no filter,
Yeah, yeah.
the real good stuff. It's about
That's,
the equivalent that I started smoking at 7.
wow.
It was like red
Wow.
hand, Rothänder.
Right.
But then I wasn't old enough to get rid of what I had done. So there was like a table that was like for a little train inside that my biological father had built. We still had the table, and it had little tunnels cut out. Because if you
Hmm.
opened it up, it was like a beautiful thing. And so
Right.
I would shove my
The cigarette
the
butts.
cigarette butts right in there, and after a while, I was found out.
Oh no. So,
That didn't make me stop smoking, though.
no, it wouldn't. Yeah, no, it didn't make. After I got busted,
Yeah.
smoking. Yeah, it didn't make me
Then
stop
you
either.
just steal like pennies, and then you like buy
Yeah,
something, and
exactly.
it doesn't bring out the best in you. But yeah, I was 7 years old, so
Well, see, this brings. Oh, go
I
ahead.
did
No,
not
please,
go
please.
to any support groups or anything because I had stopped smoking a long time in Germany, actually, after I had my daughter. I stopped
Oh,
smoking
okay.
there.
All
But
right.
I never had
So,
an hour of therapy because that was for sophisticated, fancy people. I didn't have any
right.
access to any of that. Never had an hour of therapy.
Yeah,
Came over
that's
here.
actually a miracle.
It is total miracle. I
Yeah.
came over here. Now I have adolescents, right? I have one that's pretty mild, and I have one that wasn't so mild. I didn't know what to do because you know what? They don't really like you that much during that time. And that was, oh, such a repeat. You know what I mean? You weren't
Right. The
good
wounds
enough.
were being we yeah.
Oh
Oh,
my
that's a
goodness. So that's,
girl.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, the good enough,
that's
the worthiness. Yeah,
not good enough,
yeah, I
not
hear it.
worthy, and you're guilty, and you will never do anything right, and
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of stuff. That's when I thought I'm going to go to therapy because now I was here for like, maybe a year or so, year or two. And my hair was turning gray almost. So I needed a therapist, and I thought I'm going to take my daughter to a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
That lasted,
Gotcha.
she didn't go. I went in
Oh,
first, and it was pretty clear who was the identified patient. First session. I had a fantastic older psychologist. He was a professor at BYU, actually, and had
right.
retired. And he was my first professional, and he did a pretty amazing job. The reason I think why I
That's
connected to him, he was smart,
right. Gotcha. Well,
you
you're pretty
know,
brainy too, so.
a little, yeah, from my dad and all of that. So I needed, I needed proof for a lot of
Right.
things.
Well,
And
vindication, validation, and sometimes a disinterested third party can help you do that, right?
I was terrified to be found out
Right.
because you know what? I was told every day, absolutely every day, I was stupid. I was also, when I was a teenager, I was called all sorts of names.
Yeah.
So, my track was set to not have anything good happening in my life. And so I thought I would be found out. So one day he says to me, "We're going to check your IQ," and I'm like, "That's it, I'm toast. I'm
What, you
out."
genius? Are you like, am I
No,
dealing
no,
with the
no. I
150?
thought I'm going to
Okay.
flunk the whole thing. They were going to find out that I'm actually
Uh,
really stupid.
well,
Because
but that's actually, but that isn't that just a story that you keep telling in your head, right? Is
not
it because,
anymore.
well, right, exactly. However, at that time, though, it was like that was the story that continued to run through my head,
But
you
yeah,
know?
absolutely. Because the people that are really stupid and treat you horribly project their
Their
limitations onto us,
insecurity.
and they call us everything in the book.
Exactly. And so, okay, so this is where my reconciliation came with my dad. I didn't need to necessarily throw him under the bus, even though I did speak to, him being a heavy-handed alcoholic and, just having a rough growing up. Nothing compared to what he went through. Most of the stories that I know about my dad was usually through a third party. However, they talk about forgiveness in the program of Al-Anon or any 12-step program. However, I don't necessarily think it's forgiveness that I needed. I needed a reconciliation. I needed to meet him at his level and find out everything. So when you say, these individuals that, place their burdens and their or projecting their issues onto
Limitations.
you and their limitations onto you, I as his son, I absorbed all of that
Absolutely.
unknowingly but willingly at the same time. Didn't realize what I was doing. And by that, like all of his generational trauma that had passed down through me, but manifested in a completely different way because, just like I read in the book and like we mentioned earlier, everything I wanted to do is exactly opposite of him. However, because of the fact that I took on his burdens,
Yes.
they manifested completely differently. But the same object, though, right? The same object of desire. Like he rode the coattails of the women in his life for whatever reasons, right? Whether it be financially, because he was it didn't read the English language, he was illiterate, third grade education. I went the complete opposite way, got my graduate program, but yet I still required the women in my life to complete me, right?
Yes.
And so that's how the generated, and the thing is unless you're doing and taking the time to look in the mirror and do the work, right? Unless you actually take the time to do the work, those types of things are very elusive. So you
Ah,
really have to pull apart those layers, that layer, that onion, to get to that point. So when he passed, it was like I could like legitimately let him go, but also feel the burden of the weight that years, because he and I were what's the word I'm looking for? Um, we weren't talking to each other. I
you
can't. I
were
know
at
there's a word.
odds. You were
Yeah, we were not. Yeah,
estranged.
estranged. That's the word. We were estranged. By the time he passed away, and so but it just felt like that entire like I had nothing else to prove to anyone else, and it was just it was a freeing moment, bittersweet, I guess you could say,
Yes.
because in that in that realization, I also realized that he also ran away from things as well, and that he didn't have an opportunity to reconcile things. And the funny thing is that both my sister and I have a half brother in Germany somewhere that we found out at 48 years old is when we found out. So where I'm blessed, I think, is because of the fact that I've done the work and I've been able to reconcile, with that, whereas he was at a disadvantage, he never got to. So how did you get to, okay, so there's a question behind. So when you finally
I knew
got
it.
into your healing, right? And because you had mentioned it in the beginning, but I want you to talk us through it. Because you went through and decided that you were going to pursue your doctorate's program. How did you finally get to the point where you were able to forgive or reconcile with those betrayals of the past? Is that a good?
I love it. And I didn't want to interrupt you, and I didn't. But I think there's so much to say about forgiveness. I understand, to me, the spiritual concept of forgiveness. But you know what? Somebody pointed out in some talk, the Bible also says that if somebody does you wrong, you're supposed to like forgive them, but don't go
Right.
back.
Correct.
For me, reconciliation would have been too dangerous because the people that were connected to the types of abuse were all Nazis or
Right. Right.
supposed ex-Nazis, so it would not have been a good idea to go back and do any of that. That wasn't possible. What I tell people psychologically, I like letting go.
Right.
Forgiveness, yeah, you know what? I can cast my burden on Christ and I can let God be the one who judges this. I am not in a place where I could say, I've forgiven everybody. I can't, but I've let it go and I've turned it over. That's the best I can do. I mean, if you are being like used as a sex object and handed down from neighbor to neighbor and friend to friend, how do you forgive that? But I refuse to let this rule my life. And so I just gave it to the authority for me, and that would be God. And that's what we're actually asked to do. And the rest is not up to me, you know?
See, that's. Go ahead. No, please finish.
And here's the thing, I have seen many people who in the course of the family life, somebody passes away and then they're forced to have to forgive and the family is waiting for it. I wouldn't want anybody to be forced to do that because it's such a personal thing. And so many people come in and say, well, I have forgiven the person, but it keeps me awake, right?
So you swear you've never been to a 12-step program?
I swear.
You swear? Okay, because
But, I work with a ton of people who are going to it.
yeah, okay, so that makes sense.
No. And
However,
as a professional intern, I have been to 12-step programs.
so you had to visit them, but the funny thing is because you mentioned the Bible, and what the Bible says is like you're supposed to forgive, but you can't go back. All right. However, there in 12-step programs, our ninth step says, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so. This is the second part, except when to do so would injure them or others. And others also includes
or
yourself.
yourself.
Right. And so, going back and to try, I mean, I didn't know what my father's state was. And after, because even when I was too big to be physically abused, right? It was like there was still this like this mental abuse that kept going back and forth. And
Sure.
I don't know if that was just like ignorance on his part. Again, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus, just maybe his lack of understanding or his
Right.
inability to heal himself. But it was like even when I tried to put myself out there and try to do the Christian thing and put my, turn the other cheek, so to speak, I constantly just got slapped over and over and over again,
You
metaphorically.
still get
It-
knocked down.
right.
So
And
I'm
so
not
at some
turning
point in
the other
time,
cheek.
right, at some point in time, I just got tired and I was just like, I just got to turn my back and walk the fuck away. Right. And so I think that's a good point that you bring up because there are some people that will be, regardless of whatever good faith you have, they will not come forward well intentioned. And I think that's an important thing that people need to understand when you're going through your own recovery journey, right? Because
Hmm.
in essence, I mean, your path was a recovery journey, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. On the topic of suicide, right? I know this is a dark program, but you deal with some really heavy shit. And I know that you
No,
have a really amazing story about a lady. You've told it to me once, and hopefully we'll have time to get to that. But here's one of the lines, and there's a couple of them actually. And this is chapter 3, right out of the gate. Sadly enough, for those of us who have experienced adverse childhood experiences, our long-term effects include severe depression and anxiety, which you've mentioned, sustained fight or flight mode, right? Struggles with addiction, overall complicated lives, and dealing with passive or active suicidal ideations. We've discussed that. Instead, and then we skip a couple of sentences and it says, instead, suicide is a backdoor of sorts, a means to exit an incomprehensible situation and seemingly the only thinkable way out. Now, we've talked about suicidal ideations, but what I'm more so wanting to get into is like, how did you get away from that? Right? How did you personally get away from that, and how does that translate into the work that you're doing now? Because I remember a story that you told me. It was last ski season, I think. Uh, and you told me an interesting story about an individual who was hospitalized that you were talking to. You don't have to disclose their
no, no,
their
I will
yeah.
never do that.
But
But
anyway, so
yeah,
all right,
I can
go.
share the stories. Suicidal ideation, the sentences that you skipped, I just want to, I think what is in
Mhm.
between is that so many people, and by the way, I need to disclose first that I do not recommend suicide to anybody. And if
No,
we can
no,
stop
neither do I.
anybody, we will do anything we can. We want you to reach out for help.
And I think
But
that's why I am doing this podcast is to help
I know
people who have been troubled, just like you and I.
what
Uh,
people are so shocked by is why didn't they reach out to me? They didn't love me. I don't think that's true. So God works in the mysterious ways. I had to overcome my suicidality constant as a backdoor. When I describe it as a backdoor, it doesn't seem so horrible to you as a child and adolescent or young adult because it feels like it's a backdoor because the abuse will end one day. And if it's when I die, that'll be the end of it. So sometimes children can romance the idea, and we need to pay really, really good
yeah,
attention to that. We need to listen to
especially
that,
kids. Yeah,
and we need to point out so that's a very, very permanent thing that doesn't solve anything. And so when I say God works in mysterious ways, He sends me to work at a hospital, and for 10 years I worked with people who have suicidal ideations, who attempted to commit suicide, or who die of suicide, and then I deal with the families. So, and by the way, commit is not a great word. It's not that we're looking at it as a crime. It's an action, and it's
it's
a
an attempt.
desperate action. So
Right.
I spent more time in the hospital explaining most of the time to the support team and family, number one, the person who went through the suicide attempt is the one who was mostly traumatized. End of discussion, period. They cut, they do all sorts of things. Trust me, it's huge trauma, especially if they don't have recall planning it. And I had a couple of people who had absolutely no recall. They asked in the hospital, why am I here? And the people look at them.
Were they okay? So I got to ask: were they blacked out? Were they drunk? Were they under the influence?
They were neither drunk. They were in deep despair. Some life decisions. One woman's husband was just given notification that they can't help him anymore. I mean, she was in love with this guy. It was the most beautiful couple. And she reacted in a way that she did not recall. The other one may have blacked out.
Is that a survival mechanism in the brain, not realizing that, oh geez, I'm about to kill myself? And it's just like, I mean, is there like a switch turning on and off? I mean, that's just an interesting concept that, you know.
I would probably go more to dissociating, zoning out, stepping out, and part of you takes over.
Right.
And that's not a scary thing, and that doesn't mean we're all multiple personality or now called dissociative identity disorder. But many of us who have been traumatized or fragmented, we can have a side that is pretty bold. We can also have a side that's very nice. We can also have a side that confronts things. We can also have a side that's avoidant. We can have a lot of like aspects. I like to look at like a crystal and look at all the facets. You know, just like we were talking about the umbrella for PTSD.
Right.
So depending where I am, so we call it levels of consciousness, ego states, fragments. We can call it whatever we call it. But I believe all of us trauma survivors at one point or another have been told by other people that we can have different faces. That doesn't mean completely different and nobody can recognize it, but we can be very gentle, we can be very kind, we can be also pretty harsh, we can do all sorts of things. And so we turn sometimes a little bit, right? Depending on what has happened, that comes forward. And so my thoughts about it is that they probably zoned out. Because if you black out, you can't take action.
Right.
I mean, blackout in the sense where you're like unconscious on the ground.
Right, unconscious, right, yeah.
So I would say probably it may be a dissociative move, but most of it happens when you're completely overwhelmed. So people can, for example, they come into the hospital and trauma happened in their family and they don't remember the name. We had a pastor at a hospital that I used to work with. We had psychology versus religion, our group. He went to our hospital. He was a VIP, and he for 24 hours in a fugue had no idea who he was, where he was coming from. But he also had a very, very devastating situation at home. So a lot of times when people are very overwhelmed, that's when we want to pay really good attention. My first thing is damage control. Keep your feet on the ground. Who can you trust? Who can you reach out to? And in our self-attachment, what do I know about myself that actually helps me? That actually helps me redirect, that actually helps me. If I don't know what my purpose is right now, I don't want to go down that slide and stay on that topic. That doesn't mean I'm going to be over here and I'm going to tell myself what wonderful purpose I have. It just means we're going to do damage control. Because that moment of suicidality, like I talked about this window, most of the time passes.